I took the initiative to transfer the ownership of the land from my mother-in-law's name to mine. The wife of my eldest son unilaterally changed the deed of the land inherited from my late husband to her name. Although we had a strained relationship, I never expected her to go this far. When seeking help from my eldest son, he sided with his wife, criticizing me and insisting I hand over the land to her, suggesting I live the rest of my life as a maid. I want to clarify that I never intended to mistreat her. If anything, I felt bullied in this situation. Frustrated with the lack of understanding, I decided to leave as suggested by my eldest son's wife. I questioned if I should be the one to leave, only to be mocked for not showing emotion. I wonder who is truly putting on a brave face after I leave, and what will become of them. In our late 60s, my husband and I are now left with just the two of us, leading a quiet life in the countryside. Our village lacks convenient transportation, making it challenging to reach the nearest train station, and the bus service is infrequent, especially on Sundays and holidays. The village center has a liquor store masquerading as a convenience store, standing alone. My eldest son despised this rural lifestyle, aspiring to attend a more prosperous high school nearby, but reluctantly settling for a local agricultural school due to academic limitations. Upon graduating, he left home and married a woman from the city. Despite returning for occasional marriage greetings, he rarely visits his childhood home. Despite our differences, urgent family matters sometimes require attention. Traditionally, matters concerning the house have been handled by daughters-in-law in our family. When I needed to see my eldest son's wife, I made the trip, despite her dislike for the countryside. She even commented on a country smell, spraying air freshener around me. Initially bothered, I've learned to let it slide due to our distant relationship. Meanwhile, my second son, living in a remote area due to his job, often comes home to check on us. His wife, with a generous nature, shares similar values, resulting in an exceptionally good relationship. In my late 60s, my husband unexpectedly passed away, leaving me engulfed in sorrow. His only wish was for me to lead the rest of my life without hardship, even if it meant relinquishing the ancestral land and house. I gave priority to my own life, suggesting that once I inherited the land and house, I could decide their fate. Although my husband discussed the family tradition of passing down the land and house with our eldest son, who had a preference for city life, his wife strongly opposed inheriting rural land, deeming it worthless unless it was prime real estate in a major city like New York. Consequently, the eldest son pursued other assets. Later, the second son, valuing the memories attached to the place, inherited the land and house. Despite the second son's initial consideration of moving back to live with me, they decided against it due to the burden on his commute. However, they assured me not to overexert myself and expressed openness to living together if necessary. As development began nearby, the land's value increased, and the remaining assets were split between my sons. I welcomed the convenience that development could bring to my life, such as a nearby supermarket that would eliminate the need for driving. Unexpectedly, my peace was disrupted by my eldest son's wife, who, as rumors spread about development progress, reached out expressing a desire to return and live at home. Surprisingly, she now found the countryside appealing with the prospect of modernization through land development. This change in attitude seemed motivated by the potential for increased property value. The land and house, in a prime location, gained significance with the ongoing development. The eldest son and his wife, who previously disregarded the countryside property, now sought a share of the benefits, perhaps driven by financial motives. However, the real concern for me was not about money but about honoring my husband's wishes. I listened skeptically to the eldest son's wife's seemingly theatrical excuses, recognizing the underlying issue at hand. The explanations felt like I was enduring a poorly delivered speech. To put it plainly, it appears that the eldest son has lost his job and is currently unemployed. Their savings are so depleted that they worry about next month's rent. When I inquired about the inheritance split with the younger son, the eldest son's wife expressed reluctance to touch that topic. She claimed it has only been since the 3rd anniversary of my husband's death, and she wants to be considerate about how to use the money he left. However, if they are struggling to this extent, I suggest they should use the money. During her emotional appeal, tearfully choked voice, the eldest son's wife mentioned their financial struggles, including difficulties paying for rent, gas, and electricity. She implored to move in with me, even though she used to despise the countryside and insisted on city living. I proposed that the eldest son take over the responsibility, asking if he would be better off finding a job in the city rather than in the countryside. It seemed improbable that the eldest son, who left for the city, fleeing from home, would now accept a rural life. He claimed to be in a tight spot, stating that even affording meals would soon become difficult. However, he didn't clearly express whether he intended to re-employ in the city or move to the countryside. I suggested temporary conditions for them to move in, explaining that it would be until the eldest son finds a new job. I emphasized the need for him to work, even part-time, during their stay. Considering the ongoing land development in the area, I believe there was an increase in short-term job opportunities. I intended to support them for about 6 months, helping them save enough for a fresh start. Unfortunately, when we started living together, my plans unraveled. The eldest son focused on job hunting and part-time work, but his wife, initially meek, changed her attitude when he spent long hours away from home. She complained about the inconvenience of using a pickup truck for shopping, criticizing it as tacky. Despite her previous offer to handle shopping, she refused to go again, deeming the pickup embarrassing. Her behavior became inconsistent, praising my cooking in front of her husband, but expressing disdain for country-style cuisine when he wasn't around. One day, she claimed she would cook dinner, but when I returned from tending to the backwoods, I found the house dark and locked. Unable to reach her by phone, I confronted her upon her return, questioning her whereabouts and the locked doors. She defended herself, snapping that she followed my instructions, went shopping, and forgot what I asked for. The situation left me perplexed and frustrated. I insisted on having a special dinner dish, and I mentioned that if she couldn't prepare it that night, she should leave the house. However, I never made such a statement, and I was unaware that I had been left alone. Surprisingly, my son sided with his wife without hesitation. Living together reluctantly doesn't mean one should criticize my wife, who is not accustomed to country living. It's unfair to expect her to find ingredients for elaborate dishes in this rural setting. He accused me of deliberately making her go out as a form of harassment, despite knowing better. While my son and I have had our differences and arguments in the past, this was the first time I felt unfairly berated and one-sided. Despite looking at my son, he felt like a stranger, a stark contrast to how my late husband always stood by me. I don't demand my son to take my side, but typically, husbands contribute to happier marriages when they support their wives. My late husband always listened to both sides, fostering a good relationship with his mother while she was alive. In contrast, my son now yells at me, favoring his wife's word over mine. He abruptly turned surly, suggesting that I make the fancy dish myself and eat it, as he took his wife out for a meal. He snatched the keys and left, leaving me in a state of distress. Upon returning home, I discovered that my son's wife hadn't done any housework. Upset and unable to stop crying, I continued with the chores, as there was much to do. The owner of the local diner, where we used to go as a family, visited to check on me. He revealed that my son and his wife had been bad-mouthing me there. I chose not to go into details, thanked him for letting me know, and he offered assistance if needed. After this incident, I decided not to expect anything from my son's wife. If my efforts to get along proved futile, it was better to spend time and energy on chores. I refrained from seeking revenge and continued preparing meals and doing laundry for 3, regardless of her actions. One day, she shocked me by claiming she was in the process of transferring the property and house, which are in my name, to hers. Despite her flashing documents, they appeared suspicious, resembling obvious fakes given my familiarity with such papers from my husband's previous property transfer to me. When I questioned her about the authenticity of the documents, she confidently asserted their legitimacy. She declared that she was taking over as the head of the household and demanded an apology for the way I treated my daughter-in-law. With a bold attitude, she gave me 2 options: continue living there as her maid or leave the house. I confronted my eldest son, seeking an explanation and suggesting that he should be the one leaving if he couldn't uphold our promise to live together. However, he retorted that I was the one who broke our promise first. He accused me of being the worst kind of mother who bullied his wife. My daughter-in-law manipulated the situation, using our past differences and incompatible temperaments to convince my son that I mistreated her out of spite. Realizing that persuading my son was futile, I recalled my husband's words, agreeing to consider everything but requesting a week's grace period for my preparations. Despite my daughter-in-law's reluctance, my eldest son accepted. It took exactly 1 week to organize my belongings and find a new place to move. As I left the house, my daughter-in-law taunted me triumphantly, but I chose to remain silent, giving myself a mental fist pump. This marked the beginning of my comeback. 1 month later, as anticipated, I received a frantic call from my daughter-in-law. She was in distress because she couldn't sell the land immediately. It was already in the process of being subdivided. Amid local land development, there was an offer to buy the forested hill behind our house, along with the land as a package deal. Though managing the hill alone posed challenges, I put the offer on hold. During this time, concerns about our ancestral home's aging condition arose. A relative in construction had pointed out issues during my husband's memorial service. The house, once perfect for 3 generations, now felt too large for just me. Despite my sentimental attachment, the idea of selling the house started to take shape. Feeling the loneliness lingering in the house, even if I were to rebuild it, I doubted my sons would choose to live there. Contemplating the idea, I leaned toward selling the house after my husband's 7th death anniversary. The company interested in acquiring the forest and land assured me that the development process would take years, so there was no rush. Despite my initial plans, the start of cohabitation with my eldest son and his wife prompted a change. Determined not to wait until my husband's 7th memorial, I decided to let go of the house. The company even offered to cover the cost of demolishing the house and clearing the land, providing a sense of relief. I couldn't bear the thought of my eldest son's wife, convinced of her legitimate claim, having free reign over the land my husband had left. Refusing to succumb to her or my eldest son, who unquestioningly followed his wife's words, I informed my younger son of the situation and my decision. While he expressed sadness about parting with the family home, my younger son reminded me that memories reside in the heart, not in material possessions. Moreover, he and his wife welcomed me to live with them. Despite some initial anxiety about leaving the familiar place, he assured me that this rural area would grow on me. Currently residing with my second son and his wife, I am content with their kindness. I disregarded the screams from my eldest son's wife during a call, ending it at just the right moment and blocking incoming calls. Later, my eldest son, having learned of my whereabouts from relatives, came to the second son's house, crying for help. Initially hesitant to assist, I listened as he explained that it was all his wife's doing. It began when a friend of hers introduced her to a paralegal who assured her she could transfer the property from my name to hers with a minimal fee. Believing the story, she handed over the thank you fee, thinking it was less than half the market rate. The first son's wife eagerly explained everything to the eldest son when he returned exhausted from his part-time job. Trusting his wife without much thought, he found her story plausible. The strange notion of the wife becoming the homeowner while her husband was still alive was justified by claiming it would be more convenient for me. She convinced him by suggesting they could have a heart-to-heart and work things out as fellow housewives. Sadly, he foolishly agreed, and she successfully brainwashed him. After methodically planning to kick me out behind my back, she triumphantly attempted to sell the house and land, only to discover it was impossible due to ongoing land division. Desperate, she tried to contact the friend and the paralegal, but their phone was eventually disconnected. Upon reaching out to her friend's parents, she discovered that they had disowned the criminal in question, her friend, and had no information about her whereabouts. It was then that she uncovered the shocking truth about her friend's repeated fraudulent activities and criminal convictions. The first son's wife later realized that many of her former classmates had fallen victim to her friend's schemes. This deceitful friend had been posing as a fake lawyer, accountant, and paralegal, swindling her former classmates out of their hard-earned service fees. Some victims had reported the fraud to the police, while others, considering it a costly lesson, chose not to pursue legal action. The first son's wife, who had innocently mentioned land to her friend, inadvertently facilitated the introduction of the so-called paralegal to more victims. Facing financial loss, home foreclosure, and the loss of their inheritance, the eldest son and his wife had to prioritize sorting out their situation before contemplating legal action. When it was suggested that they could rent an apartment using the remaining inheritance, they revealed that the ATM card linked to the account had been swapped, and all the money had been withdrawn. The eldest son, now genuinely broke, sought help, explaining that the first son's wife had been misled into thinking additional charges had arisen due to document preparation hassles. It was during an attempt to withdraw money from her fraudulent friend that the PIN was likely stolen. Despite warnings from the alma mater about a graduate repeatedly defrauding classmates, the first son's wife had dismissed them, believing only fools fell for scams. Dismissing their plight, I turned away from my eldest son and his wife, convinced that their greed had led to their deserved misfortune. While the inheritance was gone, I assumed the eldest son had some savings from his part-time job. However, his meager earnings had vanished into drink tabs, misled by drinking buddies. I sternly rebuffed him, blaming his lack of foresight. Just as I grew exasperated with his persistence, my daughter-in-law from the second son returned home, exuding a powerful presence with her returned GI slung over her shoulder. This unexpected arrival startled the eldest son, who had recently taken up self-defense as a hobby. Fearing confrontation, he hastily retreated, saved by the bell. I expressed gratitude to my daughter-in-law for her timely intervention. The eldest son and his wife, previously working at a diner run by a childhood friend of my husband, had lost their jobs due to incessant complaints about low pay compared to the big city. However, after their ungrateful attitude, no one was willing to lend them a helping hand. They managed to endure until the day a new house was constructed on the land where we once resided. Witnessing this, my eldest son's wife snapped, forcibly entering the premises, exclaiming that it was her land and house, asserting her ownership. Her irrational behavior led to the involvement of the police, resulting in her immediate arrest. The police reached out to me as a potential guarantor, indicating that my son was seeking help. Despite their pleas, I declined to assist. She insisted on remaining silent unless her mother was present, and the police requested my help in persuading her, to which I also refused. The police conveyed that my son was seeking help, but I felt no obligation to intervene, suggesting they might as well detain him. During her arrest, the eldest son's wife claimed she had been deceived by a fraudster, and there were similar complaints filed, seemingly validating her story. However, the existence of complaints did not absolve her of her crimes. She faced the consequences, and I learned that the friend and the fake paralegal who orchestrated the fraud were still at large. Even if apprehended, my son was informed that the stolen money might not be recovered. After the inheritance was not only used without permission, but also stolen, the couple divorced, each embarking on a new path. My eldest son, grappling with the challenge of securing stable employment, found himself in a difficult situation. His ex-wife, weary of rural life, disappeared after working at a CD bar back in the city, leaving behind substantial debts. I officially moved in with my second son and his wife, initially as a trial arrangement due to the difficulties with the eldest son's family. Despite my initial concern not to burden my daughter-in-law, the living arrangement turned out to be excellent. We communicate openly without tension, share similar tastes, and exchange recipes, making each day enjoyable. The considerate environment we've cultivated spares us from unnecessary formalities, and neighbors even mistake my daughter-in-law and me for mother and daughter, reflecting our harmonious relationship. Embracing the life my husband would have wished for, I savor each moment with my second son and his family, eagerly anticipating the stories we'll continue to share. As I pray at my husband's grave, I reflect on the journey and the newfound contentment in this chapter of my life.